episode 2016, Rogan and I are sitting together. And whether it was with me or Lex Friedman, he said, I will never have Trump on. They've tried many times for me to have Trump on. Mm-hmm. And Rogan's like, I'm not going to have him on, right? Rogan at one point said he's voting for Bernie Sanders. He said this publicly. Mm-hmm. I think he said it on an episode. Could have been like 6 years ago, 40. I don't know what it was, but he said he's voting for Bernie. So here's a guy that was a Bernie guy. Here's a guy that was one of the bigger reasons why marijuana became legal in many different places where he's given it. Here's a guy that's a man's man, UFC fighting guy. And today, your father is sitting with him.
I know. Amazing.
Is that not? But think about this. How do you lose Rogan? How do you lose Bobby? How do you lose Tulsi? How do you lose Elon? You're losing these types of people, and Trump, the boogeyman, is gaining them? Mm-hmm. Wait, what? By the way, today when they're doing a podcast together with Joe, there's a lot of numbers and data that you can look at. You know, Joe being the greatest conversationalist and the number one podcast worldwide. When he and I are sitting there talking, he says, Pat, I don't know if you know or not, the podcast is number one in 94 different countries on Spotify. It's not just number one.
94
countries is where he's at, right? And he's dominating that game.
Yeah.
After this, is it like, let the people talk and do their thing, and let's see what's going to happen November 5th?
Listen, yes and no. Obviously, I have huge respect for Rogan. I kind of grew up the UFCs, right? I've seen him my entire life. We've known him for a while, and share so many mutual friends. But no, I listen. I don't think you ever take your foot off the gas. It's kind of like not in our DNA to do so.
No,
right?
But what I'm saying is this the last podcast you guys are doing after him? It's done, or is he still going on different things?
It's probably the last kind of formal podcast, right? There might be other Twitter Spaces and other things with the Elons and other people, but. Again, he's just not one of these guys that ever pulls his foot off the gas. He's let's go hot and heavy all the way to the end, right? There are no days off, there are no breaks, there are no vacations. This guy who doesn't take vacation, and let's go hot and heavy. So no, he's gonna be running hard all the way through, bud. I mean, he has to. I mean, that's in his DNA. You can't turn that DNA off, right? It's almost the thing he gets criticized the most for, being a fighter, is his greatest attribute, and the thing that you want most in a person, which is. Like, can Mike Tyson turn off his punch? Right, he can't. Right, he only has one speed, and that's to hit hard. And my father, in the same way, is much like that. So no, he'll absolutely charge through the next 12 days. But I don't think you'll have any podcasts that even remotely reaches the level of Rogan, because there really is none. Right, I mean the guy's been transformational to media. And by the way, I freaking love to see it. I love to see it. I love to see what you guys are doing. I love to see what Rogan's doing. I love to see what all these great my wife, she's got a great podcast. I love to see what all of them are doing, because it's honestly is making the CNNs irrelevant. People are just consuming media in a very different way. And it kind of takes the corruption out of freedom of speech. I mean, you're doing as much for this whole effort as Elon Musk, who are out there fighting for free speech every day. But just by being successful, you're kind of champion free speech, right? And you're kind of making the others, irrelevant, which I think is a great thing for this country and frankly, the world.
While we're on this topic, the one guy that's come around, which is kind of weird, and I got a lot of slack, I got a lot of heat for it at the beginning. I was like, you're such a, I bet you're going to turn Valuetainment into, this is all you're doing. Why would you ever bring that piece of, I mean, it was like, brother, it was insane.
Who was saying this?
I don't even want to say it,
Tell
but
me.
Trust me, it's the cream of the crop. Everybody was saying about us bringing Cuomo in here, right? And when we brought Cuomo in, we did the couple live podcasts with him and Candace, with him and Dave Smith. He sat down with Dave Smith. It was a tough one.
Oh, yeah.
He was in a lion's, to be honest with you. It was. I don't know if anybody was for him, except maybe 10 people were for him in the room. And he came around. And then yesterday, he's doing a town hall, Rob. If you got this clip with J.D. Vance, and he's surprised. What a great moment, right? When he's with J.D. and he says, hey, matter of fact, I'll just let you watch this for yourself, and I want you to react to this. So go ahead. Here's Chris Cuomo.
For this one. Oh, no. Not unlike Beetlejuice. If you invoke the former president's names too many times in a row, he's going to want to weigh in on what is being said about him. And we have a call right now from former President Donald John Trump. He wants to weigh in. Mr. President, I know there's a little bit of a delay. Can you hear us? And what is your question for the senator?
Well, I can hear you, Chris, and I do have a question, and I think it'll be quite an interesting one. The answer should be easy. How brilliant is Donald J. Trump?
They're not laughing.
She was not happy at all.
His answer
Take
was
your
great.
time. Think about it.
Well, first of all, sir, this is supposed to be undecided voters. I would hope that I have your vote, of all people. But here's first of all, sir, of course, you're very brilliant, and we both agree. We both agree that it's important to have very smart people running our government. But here's the thing about President Trump that, aside of you, sir, if you'll forgive me for telling this story, that I think often people don't see. And of course, I got my beautiful wife here in the front row. And one of my favorite moments with President Trump is we were hosting an event for him near our home in Cincinnati a few months ago. And of course, my wife was a little bit nervous to really, talk to the president of the United States. And he asked her, what do you think about your husband being in public service? And she gives, if you know my wife, a very diplomatic answer. Sir, he really cares about the people of Ohio. He's thrilled to be able to serve them, and I'm happy to support him however I can. And President Trump chuckles and goes, yeah, my wife hates it too. and the thing that it did is it just immediately broke the barrier. And it wasn't the former president. It was just a person talking to my wife. And I think you guys were able to have a nice conversation. But that ability to relate to anybody in any environment, I think that's the true brilliance of Donald J. Trump.
So, by the way, another great moment. And if there's one person that's really grown on everybody's JD, but I want to focus on Chris for this moment now. How are you individually yourself, processing what's happened with Cuomo after leaving CNN, fired, Don Lemon himself, him going to News Nation, him coming on him doing all. Who is Chris Cuomo to you guys now?
So remember, Patrick, I knew all of these people, and I knew them pre-politics, right? Erin Brunette, she'd come over to Trump Tower, she would have lunch with us all the time, right? You mentioned Mika and Joe the other day. I mean, Mika and Joe literally used to half live in Mar-a-Lago. They'd go down there, on weekends. They spent a tremendous amount of time down there. They were in our office all the time. I mean, they absolutely loved us. Donnie Deutsch, I used to do Donnie Deutsch's show all the time when he was on CNBC. I'd go across to Fort Lee and film. I mean, these people absolutely adored us until one moment. And that's when my father stepped foot on, I don't even think he said a word at that point. He stepped foot on that escalator, and then all of a sudden the light switch just shut off. And I knew Chris very well. I knew him before CNN. I knew him at CNN. I mean, I did a show a ton of times in 2016 and all the years on CNN. And now I still go on a show on News Nation. And what's really remarkable is kind of the ebbs and flows of these people, right? On CNN, he had one gear, and that's anti-Trump. And now all of a sudden he realizes that he's no longer at CNN and no longer really works for his persona, and he's actually doing much better today than I think he ever was. He's actually gained kind of a following because, and I actually enjoy going on his show. It's good, sometimes heated debate, but he can be sensible when he wasn't sensible on CNN whatsoever. And so, the problem is, how at some point you've got to look at your heart and soul and actually be sincere as an individual and have conviction. And, you kind of can't bop and weave, and that's what creates mistrust. And so the question is, as good as he's done coming out of CNN, can he ever fully regain what somebody who didn't have that baggage, because again, so many of the positions he took, the Russia hoax, they were truly nonsensical. And now all of a sudden it sounds like he's making sense. Listen, I'm not sure if he's any fan of ours, to tell you the truth. He's still probably on the other side, but at least he'll give honest answers and have a spirited debate and do so with a smile on his face and ask a question like that or kind of pull a stunt like that. And listen, it's nice to see. I still think it's insincere if you look at character, because I don't think if you really kind of have moral conviction, can you change like that? I mean,
that's heavy, what you just said right there. Mm-hmm. And the part that I see with what you're saying, and I've spent a lot of time with him behind closed doors and on camera, and we've had a lot of discussions about this next, I'm a free agent campaign that he's on, is the part that I think he relates to you and has sympathy for you, and maybe he's realizing that the unfairness of the media that attacked you and your family, including himself, is because his father was Mario Cuomo. And his father was a governor.
But I call BS on that, right? There should be no one that understands that game better than him, knowing that his father was Mario
exactly
Cuomo,
what I'm saying. Right. That's what I'm saying.
So if you understood that game, you should be at least sympathetic to that game, right? It's I would think that would actually open your eyes.
While he's in it?
I don't know, more so than the random news host who grew up through different media markets in the country, worked their way up, and have been blindly told what to say for 15 years and only got their big break in life because they followed orders. Yeah, I kind of think he should be almost more discerning than those people.
Maybe he's going through it.
Maybe
he's going through it now.
By the way, maybe he's seeing the light. Right. And by the way, I happen to like Chris, right? Like Chris and I do great together, and I love going on the show. Like I don't, and I by the way, I loved going on with CNN. I've never had a problem going into kind of.
What do you think about his brother? Do you have a relationship with him,
son?
Andrew?
Less so. I mean, truthfully, I think he kind of got bamboozled in New York by the very same person who went after us relentlessly, which was Letitia James. I mean, it's kind of interesting. She threw him out of the office in about 3 weeks. Tried to run for governor, got about 2% of the vote, and then dropped out after creating mass carnage in the state. Right? I mean, yeah, my heart actually kind of goes out for his brother, and Chris and I have talked about this. I mean, Chris and I have talked about kind of the interesting nature of being a pretty prominent political figure in this country while trying to live independent lives. And I mean, obviously he was in the business world or the media world, and Chris and I have talked about this pretty extensively, but. I don't know. I would hope his personal experiences with his father actually would have allowed him to be a little bit more sensitive, at least in terms of the family aspect of politics, during the worst times, during the Russian nonsense, during the dirty dossiers, when they were trying to impeach him every single day. I mean, he was out there leading the charge on this crap, right? And, what's interesting is, karma oftentimes is kind of far too slow, but karma ultimately kind of in a certain way came around. I mean, the very thing that he was attacking us for was ultimately kind of almost what allowed him to get thrown out of office, right? It was almost like the demise of the Cuomo dynasty in New York, and so I don't know. I wish he would have been able to see that.
Only reason I say, I mean, I'm an outsider. I'm not on the inside. I'm not Trump. I'm not Cuomo. I'm David. I'm in a very different lens, so I can look both independently. Everybody knows where I lie and how I feel about your pops. It's not we don't walk on eggshells, and we're uncomfortable to kind of share our opinions. And we've been on many heated battles with this. But sometimes, to me, it's kind of like Bobby. How Bobby is now in, and look at the role that he plays, Bobby Kennedy, or Tulsi. Look where Tulsi was at. And now I'm a Republican. Wait, what, Tulsi? She's a Republican now? Yeah. And the support that she brings in. And even in the Old Testament, I mean, New Testament, you look at 25% of the New Testament. I think Paul, I don't know how much of it New Testament Paul wrote. A majority of it Paul wrote, right? Who was Paul before Paul became Paul? He was Saul. And what does Saul do? So, I mean, I think this next phase of independent broadcasting, podcasting that's going to come up, I think the next 8 years to 12 years is going to be very weird. Yeah. And we're going to look at it in 2020 and we're going to be like, what the F happened in 16?
Totally. Can I tell you the one difference, though?
Yeah, go ahead.
When Bobby Kennedy got out of the race, right, and ultimately endorsed my father, I think every person listening to us right now should go listen to it, because it was maybe one of the great takedowns of what's happened across his life and the way they tried to weaponize the system to kind of screw him.
It was
right?
phenomenal.
It was. I would listen to it every single day because he was so perfect, right? And I have such immense respect for him. We've known him for kind of a very long time. It's no different than they did with Bernie Sanders, right? They screwed Bernie Sanders. The difference is Bernie Sanders has never actually come out and said they kind of screwed me, right? And now I see the light. Chris Cuomo has never really come out and said, listen, like I agree. I see real flaws, right? And now I realize that, we went pretty deep and it was probably unfair. And my whole new mantra in life is going to be, having at least an additional lens, right, in which I view the prism of the world. Yeah. The problem is he hasn't really done that. He's never really acknowledged it. What he is doing is trying to tack a little bit further to the right. It's not much further, but a little bit further to the right. Because frankly, I mean, CNN was running like 300,000 people a night. It was probably the lowest watch show on TV, right? I mean, reruns of the Brady Bunch were beating CNN at one point, right? So I think you realize it was bad. It was really damn bad. I think you realize he had to tack right. Is that for his career, or is that because he actually? So I just wish, like Bobby, he came out and said, listen, the mainstream media, there's a real problem with it, and some of the things at CNN, there's a real problem with it, and I've seen the light, and I've seen the prison, and I'm going to try and be more objective. And I think I'd have a lot of respect for him if he did that.
And I will give this last one, and we can transition. And if you want to say anything else back, please. But if you don't, we can go to the next story. Is the part when I hear him out and I see where he's at, the whole concept of I've interviewed a lot of mobsters, a lot of them. And I was the first to interview a lot of these guys. Sammy DeBull, he's coming out of jail. I'm the first to interview him right after Diane Sawyer. He's like, how many views Diane Sawyer She sat down with me, she got 20 million views. You think you're going to beat that? I said, Sammy, we're going to get more than 20 million. No, who are you? Who do you think? And we're saying like, we're going to get shot tonight, right?
Yeah.
We're in Arizona. And then we do the interview with Sammy, boom. Not the clips, just the interview, 22 million views. It's like, hey, you beat Diane Sawyer. I'm like, yeah. So we've sat with him. We've had with Sammy, Michael Francis, Frank Collada, the guy from Tony Spilatra that in the movie Casino.
Put his head in a vice.
Put in a vice. Or even Oscar Goodman. Anyways, I can give a list of Phil Leonetti calls me. Who was the underboss of you should know who Phil Leonetti is because Jersey, all those guys, Philly, Nicky Scarfo, and Ralph Natali, the former boss of the Philadelphia crime family. So when you interview these guys, you'll learn. And the reason why I interview these guys because there's a dirtiness in politics, like you said. At least in business, we're like, look, you're going to make $2 million more than I am. Screw it. Let's do it because I'm going to win in this way. Let's do the deal, right? And we both want to make sure this project wins.
Yeah.
Politics doesn't work that way. It's a little dirty. The Roy Cohn rule is what? Attack, attack, attack. Never accept defeat and always claim victory, right? And he's written about in the Sammy book, in the Omerta book, in the mob book. Roy, you study the mob stuff. These guys, I was interviewing them 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 5 years ago. Roy was a discussion with every one of these guys that would come up. So I think there's a part with Chris that he watches how your father has never accepted, like he's always in that offensive mode. It's the alpha part to say, I'm also not going to give in. I think that's the part
Agreed.
where
100%.
Where, by the way, but there's one caveat that I'm going to say that he's not going to like. Chris, don't watch the next minute, please. Don't watch the next minute.
Out.
You got a big show tonight. Do your thing. Skip today's podcast. Don't text me. We talked earlier today. Skip it. Here's the next one. I told him today early morning. I said, you did a great job with, what do you call it? With J.D. Vance. I thought it was great. But here's a part that you have to understand, okay? Sometimes you forget that there's levels to the game, and you may be an alpha in a city, but you're not an alpha in that state. You may be an alpha in a state, but you're not the alpha of the region. You may be an alpha of the region, but you're not the alpha of the country. You may be the alpha of the country, but you're not the alpha of the continent. You may be the alpha of the continent, but you're not the alpha of the world. This is the alpha of the world right now. Mm-hmm. There's different levels to the game with alphas. I mean, if you want to, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't go alpha and do the measuring contest of where you are. Men will understand what I'm talking. That's the only thing. That sometimes you have to have this conversation. That's like, you just got to say, look, bro, there is one of that right now. Leave it alone. It's his time. Play your part. Go kick some ass. You're very important. Do your thing. Anyway, tonight it ends at midnight. I just want to remind everybody. Next week we're running a sweepstake for next week. The big game next week, Game 5 in New York against LA, October 30th. And this is what we're doing for every dollar spent on merch. VTmerch.com. We got 15 new hats. This is officially the number one selling new hat that came about. We got a bunch of other ones there. The polo shirts are going left and right, but for every dollar you spend on merch, up to $1,000, it will go into sweepstakes. And then tomorrow we will pull a name, and one of you will be joining us next Wednesday, October 30th at Game 5. And we're excited about it, but it ends tonight, Tom, if I'm not mistaken, at midnight. Do you have any other thing? And by the way, we'll get you one ticket. You'll be with us, one seat when you join us. And on top of that, $2,500 for flight and room. And Tom, maybe if you got any other thing to add to it.
No purchase necessary for the PBD Podcast 2024 Baseball Sweepstakes, sponsored by Valuetainment and open only to legal residents of the United States and District of Columbia, 18 years and older. Entry deadline again tonight, October 25th at 11:59, midnight tonight. For full entry and rules, visit VTmerch.com, where you can buy the merchandise. $1 spent, one entry in the contest, up to $1,000 spent. And you can also find it in the description for this episode of the podcast, found on the PBD Podcast channel on YouTube. Void where prohibited by law.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.